This is a piston filler. Unlike a typical cartridge converter pen, which has a separate reservoir to hold ink, a piston filler uses this back mechanism to allow you to draw ink directly into the barrel of the pen. And that's a great feature because it typically will nearly double your ink capacity. However, every so often you may find that you need to disassemble this unit for regular cleaning and maintenance, and that may feel a little bit daunting. So in this video, I want to dispel any concerns you may have and go over the typical way to disassemble and reassemble this unit, as well as some good troubleshooting techniques. But before we do, I want to have a few disclaimers. First of all, anytime you disassemble a fountain pen, you risk voiding the warranty as well as possibly damaging components. So move forward at your own risk. And secondly, I'm going to be disassembling the piston unit, which Pelikan first patented in 1928. Now, there are a few modern fountain pens which will disassemble differently. For example, the Montblanc 146, the Lamy 2000, and even some other Pelikans. This is the Pelikan M200, the M400, and M600 all go together in a different manner. But by far, the vast majority of modern piston filling fountain pens utilize Pelikan system. We already looked at two models so far in this video. This is the TWSBI Eco and the Pelikan M800. I'll pull in a couple more. This is the Pilot Custom Heritage 92. It's the only piston filling fountain pen that Pilot makes, and they decided to utilize Pelikan system. And Sailor also followed suit with their only piston filling model. This is the Sailor Realo. As well as just about every fountain pen that comes out of China. Here we have the Wingsung 699. This is stylized very similarly to the Pilot Custom 823. However, unlike the 823, this one is offered not only as a vacuum filler, but also as a piston filler. And as you can see, many of the components on this piston unit are transparent. For that reason, I've decided I'm going to use this model for today's demonstration. To start things off, you are going to need a wrench. And some piston fillers, such as this TWSBI Eco, came with a wrench in the box, but unfortunately they are in the minority. And in the case of this Wingsung 699, it did not come with a wrench. But I was lucky enough to find that this Asvine multi-wrench fits it just about perfectly. And this is an extremely useful tool. It has multiple different size slots to fit many different pens. And I'll be sure to leave a link to this in the description below in case you want to check it out. For the Wingsung, I'm going to take the cap off the pen, and that will allow any pressure buildup inside this barrel to easily escape. On the back of this pen, we have this black end finial, which doubles as a piston knob. If I give it a twist, we'll see the piston rod extend inside the barrel. Also, as I give this piston knob a twist, it will retract away from the bottom of the barrel. And as it does, it will reveal another component. This smoked gray component I will refer to as the connector piece. It features two flats, which we can grab a hold of with our wrench. And I'm going to screw the piston knob down onto that wrench just to make sure we have good contact. And then we're going to give the wrench a clockwise turn. Now, I like to turn with the barrel instead of the wrench in order to avoid over-torquing and possibly cracking the pen. If you look closely at this pen, there are some micro cracks on the barrel, and that's because this is a lesson that I learned on this particular pen. Soon, the piston will be able to be pulled straight out, and I'm going to set the barrel aside for now. And here we have our piston assembly. Now, for regular cleaning and maintenance, I don't recommend disassembling this any further. I would just simply run the head under some water, and if you see some stubborn ink stains, maybe rub it free with your fingers. I would then apply some silicone grease in between these two seals on the piston head to ensure good sealing against the barrel. And then you could also apply a little bit on this thread in order to ensure smooth operation in and out of the piston assembly. But because in this video we want to troubleshoot this assembly, I am going to disassemble it further. If we continue unscrewing this piston knob, the rod will continue extending out of the connector. And we can see the end of the rod just there. As it reaches the edge, we can pull it out. If I continue unscrewing that piston knob, soon it can be pulled out too. And then we have our connector piece as well as this piece, which I refer to as the key. At the front, you can see it has kind of a corkscrew design thread, which meshes with the ribs that we see on the piston rod. And on the back, there are a series of grooves. Those grooves line up to ribs that are on this piston knob. And I'll pull in some light so that you can see that in more detail. Now this connector piece, it appears pretty simple at first glance, but it has a lot going on and it is a very critical piece. Here I have it in kind of a smoked gray finish. Most of the time you're going to see this either as a black plastic component or maybe made out of metal. The front threads line up to threads that are on the barrel, so that effectively acts as a way to secure this piston unit into the pen body. We then have a flange at the back. In this case, it's a trim ring, but you will always have a flange. And then you have a section with the two flats that we grabbed a hold of with our wrench for disassembly. And at the back is another series of threads which mesh with the threads that are on the piston knob. In order to reassemble our pen, I'm going to start with putting the key into the piston knob. If you have it fully seated, they should move as one unit. We'll then reinsert that into our connector and start screwing down. Now the point at which you decide to stop screwing this down and reinstall the rod is what's going to limit the amount of travel that you have on the rod. I personally like to typically start with stopping around where those flats begin. I'm going to grab my rod, and if we take a look at the front of the connector, we'll see that there is a slotted hole which meshes with the slot on this profile. I'll apply a little bit of pressure with my hand as I continue screwing the knob down in the clockwise direction. And at this point, the piston knob has bottomed out against this flange. But we can see that there are still quite a few fins that are exposed, so we can probably get a bit of extra travel on this piston rod. In order to achieve that, I'm going to unscrew the piston knob and remove the rod. We'll then unscrew the knob a little bit further to give it more travel before it bottoms out on that edge. We'll reinsert our rod and then screw down. That's looking better. I'm going to try and get a little bit more out of it. Unscrew a little bit further, reinsert the rod, and then screw down. And that looks just about perfect. I like to see a little bit of wiggle on the rod to ensure that I know that this has bottomed out fully against the trim piece. In order to reinstall this, we're going to unscrew it a bit to expose those flats. We'll slide the piston unit through the back of the pen body, grab the flats with our wrench, screw down onto that flat, and then give it a clockwise turn to install it into the back of the pen. I'll loosen up the knob to get the wrench out. And at this point, this piston unit is fully functional with a very good volume of ink. Now you may ask yourself, what happens if I don't get this piston rod aligned properly with the knob? And I'll show you that right now. Let me go ahead and take this pen apart real fast. Now to me, there's basically two ways that you can get these two components not oriented properly. The first is that you simply have not enough travel on the rod. And in order to achieve that, I'm going to screw the piston knob down too far, put our rod back in, and screw it down. At this point, the piston knob has bottomed up against this flange, and you can see there's a lot of fins exposed. Now you can reassemble this into the pen, but quite obviously you're going to greatly limit your ink capacity. And what if you want to just simply maximize your ink capacity and you don't really care about bottoming out the piston knob against this flange? In that case, I'm going to remove the piston knob, put it just as it engages the threads, and then insert the rod and screw it down. And here you can see that there is a decent amount of gap between the trim piece and the knob, while the rod itself is bottomed out against this connector piece. I'm going to remove it a little bit so that we have access to the flats, put the wrench back in, and then reinstall it into our pen body. Now with the piston knob in the fully locked down position, we can see the rod is all the way back. But if I were to try and fill up this pen with ink and extend the piston rod, let's see what happens. The entire assembly falls apart. And that's not really something that you want while you're filling up this pen, especially if the bottom is submerged in ink. So that is the main reason that you want to spend a little bit of extra time to ensure you have the maximum amount of capacity on your piston unit while the knob is still bottomed out against that flange. Let me troubleshoot it one more time just so that you can see it again. Again, I'm going to screw that knob down, insert our rod. I'm going to try and get a little bit more travel out of that. You can see it is a little bit of a time-consuming process. And again, that is why during regular cleaning and maintenance, I don't recommend disassembling this unit. But at this point, this is pretty much an optimal assembly. I'll go ahead and put this back into my pen. I hope that you found this video informative and useful. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comments section below. I tried to make an extra effort to read each one and respond. I know that this can be a kind of a confusing assembly and it can be quite tedious as well as tiresome. So take your time, avoid disassembling if you can. And I just want to say thank you for watching.